Yeah.
And joining us now is Republican presidential candidate and former New Jersey Governor Christie. All right, so you're a former prosecutor,
Yep.
and you look at this, and I maybe wanted to ask you that same question. So you have the federal case, which you're very familiar with, and you have a state case, and usually the federal case will supersede the state case, but not in this case.
Well, this is why I'm uncomfortable with what I read last night. I think that this conduct is essentially covered by the federal indictment. Not with the level of detail that they cover it in this, but that's just a stylistic thing. Election interference is election interference. It's been charged by Jack Smith, and most of the time what you'd see here would be a state court deferring to a federal prosecution, especially if that federal indictment had already been issued. So I think this was unnecessary as to Donald Trump. Now, remember, as to the other defendants, Jack Smith chose not to charge them. So I would have less of a problem with this if she decided, okay, I'm not going to charge Donald Trump here because he's been charged for essentially this conduct by Jack Smith. But Giuliani and Meadows and others have not been charged at the federal level. That would be a more defensible indictment, I think.
So let me ask you, so you agree with what Turley just said then? He called it excessive.
Yeah, I think it was unnecessary.
Why then would you, as a Democratic DA, pursue state charges if you think by law they're already covered in these other cases?
See, people view this, and your question views it as a partisan decision. Don't forget that these prosecutors all have egos. And she's been investigating this thing for two and a half years. Jack Smith comes in within the last year. He swoops in, he charges quickly, and she said, whoa, wait a second. I've been looking at this. I'm sure what this indicates is there's not cooperation between her office and the special counsel's office. And I'm sure he wanted her to defer. She chose not to. So what I'd say to the viewers, Bill, is don't necessarily look at this as a partisan decision. This is probably an ego decision where she said, well, hell, I put all this time and effort into this investigation, and I want something out of it.
They were saying the same thing about Alvin Bragg here in New York.
Well, that's right. And that's why I think we immediately put it into when they're opposite parties, into a partisan choose. I could tell you from having done this, that often I would get on the phone with a local prosecutor when we were investigating the same thing and say to them, I need you to stand down. The problem here is I did that inside New Jersey where those folks had to continue to work with me after this case. Here, they don't have to work together. And so there's less leverage that Jack Smith has against a Fani Willis or against an Alvin Bragg to say, back off because you're going to need me later on something else. Don't do this for an ego boost, which is, I think, what she did here. Now, the other part to look at, though, is exactly what Jonathan said as well, which is the conduct that underlies here is not just a simple election contest. Donald Trump had 3 counts of the vote here in Georgia. He had the original count, he had a machine recount, and then he had a hand recount. All those things were given at his request, the last 2 in particular. He also was able to contest these things in court in Georgia and did not win. All that stuff, I'd say, is absolutely legal and within his right to do. Where this starts to be problematic for him is the electors and the pressure that was being put on folks after all these counts happened. And that's where I think his exposure is in the federal case, and that's where his exposure would be here.
Let's look at call for number 4 here. This is the Trump court dates that are going to clash with the campaign trail. I'm sure you're pretty aware of those, and that's actually...
Try to be.
I'm sure you are.
A lot of them.
In addition to that, if you look at the statement that he gave to Fox News Digital last night, let me read it to you. This is from President Trump himself. He said, this politically inspired indictment, which could have been brought close to 3 years ago, was tailored for placement right smack in the middle of my political campaign where I am leading all Republicans. Is there something to that? That if she...
Nothing.
Could she have done this before? It's not.
There's nothing to it. Look, and if she had charged him 3 years ago, he would have said, what a rush to judgment. There's been no investigation. No one's looked into this. And now they're just charging me for political reasons. He wants to have his cake and eat it too. If, in fact, the charges had happened 3 years ago, he would have said there was no investigation, it's a rush to judgment. If they happened after a full investigation, he says, well, now it was time to work with the campaign. Look, running for president is his choice. No one else is making him do it. But it is not an excuse not for the justice system to continue to operate. And I think all of these judges, in the end, will make decisions based upon reasonable availability of all the witnesses and everyone else. And in the end, what Donald Trump has to deal with is, this is not a civil case. He's never been involved in criminal cases before. He's been involved in civil cases where you can just put it off and like, it's no big deal. Mm-hmm. He is out on bail in 3 different jurisdictions. Usually when you're charged, often people are remanded and they stay in prison prior to the trial. He's been given released on all 3, and he'll be released confidently in the 4th one.
I want to talk a little bit about your campaign and what's expected in a moment here, but just one more question on this. Everyone lit their hair on fire when that phone call was recorded on behalf of Raffensperger, right? It runs an hour and change. And the key line, I went back and listened to this morning, Trump says, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes. Now, and he says repeatedly, in my opinion, this is what we should do, in my opinion, et cetera. If he's speaking his opinion, is there a crime in this conversation?
Well, look, I think that's what a jury is going to decide, Bill. What I would say to you is, when you listen to the entire conversation, his problem is that and you combine it with all the other conversations he's having with Brian Kemp, with other officials in the legislature and the leaders of the legislature. He was attempting to do everything he can to get that result and putting pressure on them.
And Alan Dershowitz argued last night that they were doing the same thing on behalf of Al Gore in Florida and in Palm Beach County in the year 2000.
Except when Al Gore lost his legal challenges, he conceded the election. Al Gore took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. He availed himself of all the legal challenges, Bill. And then when the courts were done, Al Gore said, I still don't agree with it, but the courts are done. I'm backing off. Donald Trump has been much different. And I said this to the president in December of 2020, the last time he and I spoke. I said, you've availed yourself of the courts. There's nothing left. You need to concede the election. And he said, I will never, ever, ever admit it. Mm-hmm. Well, look, if you're going to continue to use the power of the presidency, which he was doing, to put pressure on people, you're going to put yourself in a very dangerous circumstance. And let's take it aside for a second from the criminal. We can't normalize this conduct. I mean, this has never happened before in this country, ever, where you had a candidate for president of the United States conduct himself in this way, to disrespect the election process in this way, to refuse to accept the verdict of the voters. Mm-hmm. And what does it say about his judgment, guys? What does it say about whether or not he's fit to sit behind that desk? Is this really, and by the way, here we are this morning, and I understand why we're doing this, and I'm happy to talk about it because of my background.
Yep.
But we're not talking about what Joe Biden's doing to this country. We're not talking about the poorest border. We're not talking about the fact that health care is a mess, right?
That the Trump people would say that the indictments were by design to prevent them from being able to let him do that. But
Dana, he's made the choice for the last 2.5 years. This is what he's been talking about. He has spent most of his time before he was ever charged with anything. All he's been talking about is that the election was stolen. When he was on another show on this network with Bret Baier a month or so ago, and Bret asked him, how are you going to get people who didn't vote for you in 2020, especially suburban women, to vote for you in 2024? And he said, well, I didn't lose in 2020. I mean, that's before he was charged with anything.
That's true. And yet, so we have the New York Times Siena College poll. I'm sure you're aware of it. Trump 54, DeSantis 17. You're down at 2% there. I know that your polling in New Hampshire is certainly better. We're a week from tomorrow. We'll have the debate.
Yep.
What is your plan if President Trump isn't there?
It's no different than whether he is or isn't there. We need to make a case. Any one of us who are on that stage, we need to make the case to Republican voters why we're the best person to beat Joe Biden. And I think by Donald Trump not being there, he's showing everybody what a problematic candidate he is against Joe Biden. He's not going to be there because he doesn't want to answer to all of these charges. He doesn't want to be questioned by other candidates about all these charges. Well, he can't avoid that forever.
Is that a challenge?
It always has been a challenge, Bill, you bet.
No, is that a challenge from you?
Oh, it is. Absolutely. I've been saying it all along. If he doesn't show up, he's a coward.
And will you sign the pledge?
Yeah, of course I will.
It seems that you're playing for New Hampshire.
Initially, New Hampshire and South Carolina.
Emerson College had a poll just out about an hour ago. Trump was at 49%. DeSantis was at 8%. You were at 9%.
Yeah.
So you got some work to do.
Yeah, but let me tell you something, Bill. I'm in this race for 2.5 months, and I've got from nowhere to second place in New Hampshire. If you're Governor DeSantis this morning, you're going to be wondering what the hell happened here. Okay, he's been the presumptive front challenger since before he was reelected governor of Florida. I'm now past him in New Hampshire after 2.5 months. And yeah, my first goal was to get there. My next goal is to beat Donald Trump. And if he is not willing to show up at the debate, what he's saying is he is unwilling to do two things: to defend his conduct, both at the end of his presidency and since he left, and he is unwilling to lay out his vision for the future about how to beat Joe Biden. He needs to do both, and Republican voters have the right to hear that compared to the other candidates.
Just to be clear, Dana asked you if you were going to sign the pledge. You haven't signed it yet, but you're going to?
I haven't been presented with it yet. The RNC has not sent me the pledge yet to sign. They're supposedly going to send it to me this week.
Ronna McDaniel is a text away, I do believe.
I spoke to her over the weekend. She said they're reviewing all of the donors. They go through and they verify that you do a data sharing agreement, that all your donors are there. They're going through that process with my campaign now. She said as soon as they're done with that, she'll send me the pledge. And I called her over the weekend to tell her, and not only when you send it, I will sign it. Because the most important thing, guys, is to be on the stage so our voters get to make an informed choice about who can beat Joe Biden. And Donald Trump is damaged goods.
We're in for a big night in Milwaukee in 8 days.
Looking forward to it.
We'll see you there.
We'll be there.
You guys are going to be there, too? We're looking forward to
see
seeing you.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Governor. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.